Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on URM's webinar. We're going to be talking about Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, and we're going to take a slightly different approach in terms of a bit more of a Q&A session. So my name is Lauren Gotting. I'm new business director here, and I'm joined by Amajit Sandhu, who is URM's cybersecurity analyst and Cyber Essentials Plus assessor as well. So today we are going to be covering what is Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. We'll keep that at a fairly high level for anyone that is new to the scheme. We'll run through the certification requirements and very importantly discuss some of the recent changes that are coming up. So in April, the requirements are changing. There's a new questionnaire coming out, so we'll talk about the key changes to look forward to. And then we're going to be answering some key questions around Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. So we invited anyone that registered to pre-ask questions, so we'll run through those. If anyone's got any questions as we go through the presentation, please add them into the question pane and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get round to them all, we'll reach out offline to address those questions specifically for you, so you can really get some details and very relatable sort of answers to your questions. Before we kick into the presentation, I will just give you a quick overview on URM Consulting for those that are new to us, or if this is your first event you've attended. So we've been around for nearly 20 years. It's our 20th anniversary this year, so looking forward to that. And within URM, we have expertise in a number of different areas around governance, risk and compliance and cybersecurity. So we support with ISO certification projects, achieving and maintaining compliance to things like GDPR, SOC 2, of course, your Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus as well. And we also have a dedicated cyber team that conduct penetration tests and vulnerability scans. So we offer all these services under one roof. The team within URM are very dedicated, very passionate team here, and their goal is always to help organisations become more secure and improve what they're doing. I think what sets us apart from most is all of our consultancy team have worked both sides of the fence. So they've been in their roles operationally before joining URM as consultants. So they've got that real world experience and understand what it's like to be on your side rather than our side. As an organisation, we do like to practice what we preach. So we have our own Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus certificates. We're CREST accredited. We've got our ISO standards, ISO 27001. And business continuity 22301 as well. And we also line up with BCS and offer a range of training courses in the information security world. So a little bit about URM. AJ, if I pass over to you to tell everyone a little bit about you.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm one of the C and C Plus assessors at URM. Got about 30-ish years experience. Worked in lots of roles in IT, from fixing printers all the way to data center migrations, planning, fixing, every kind of position you can think of in between, covering lots of areas which come in useful for CEs.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm sure being a CEC Plus assessor at URM is probably the best job you've ever had.
Yeah, it's up there. It's enjoyable speaking with clients and helping them become more secure.
Yeah, I'm sure if anyone has done Cyber Essentials Plus through URM, they probably had the pleasure of working with you at some stage, I'm sure. Excellent. So I think first of all, if we just run through what is Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, and we'll start with just an overview of the scheme itself. So Cyber Essentials is a government-backed scheme. The NCSC is the cyber arm of the UK government, hence why it's endorsed by government and often mandated, for any government contracts and things like that. So it was put in place initially to give organisations a baseline of security against the common cyber threats that they found during their research. So it's all about allowing organisations to put simple controls in place to protect themselves, and everyone should follow the same sort of rules and controls. So the NCSC, they stipulate the requirements. It's then administered by an organisation called IASME. So they work together. IASME produce the questionnaire. IASME run the stats and sort of back office sort of portals and things like that. And then organisations work directly with certification bodies, which is where URM fits. So URM works with IASME to make sure we understand the requirements and what's expected of organisations. We run the assessments, and we work with clients to actually issue the certificates. And some key differences between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. So Cyber Essentials is a completely self-assessed process. It is done online. It's a questionnaire. You complete the answers, and then we review them. And if they meet the requirements of the standard, we say, yes, everything is compliant, and you get your certificate. AJ, Cyber Essentials Plus, there's a little bit more to that. So can you maybe just run through what the differences are between the standard and the Plus assessment?
Yep. As you said, the CE is a self-assessed, and the CE Plus is then validating some of the responses you've provided in the CE. We run some manual checks. We do some vulnerability scans on the devices and also on your external internet-facing IP addresses, just to confirm there's no vulnerabilities and you're complying with the requirements.
Excellent. Obviously, there's quite a lot of requirements in Cyber Essentials. During the Plus, do you sort of test every question and the response to every answer?
So we don't test everything because that would just take too long. So the areas we cover is mainly things like you're using your accounts correctly. So you're logged in with standard user accounts. You're not using the same accounts for multiple services, making sure that your malware configuration is set up correctly. So we'll download some fake virus files, make sure they're being handled correctly, and then we'll run through the scans and make sure those are compliant.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think you're right. It would take a long time. There's about 100 questions, isn't there, to complete? So yeah, I can imagine that would be very time consuming. Brilliant. Thanks, AJ. Okay, so in terms of scoping Cyber Essentials, we get involved in a lot of conversations around this. What's your view on an organisation scope? Should they just include everything? Can they split it down?
So ideally, and something IASME recommend is that most organisations try and go for whole organisation if they can. Obviously, there's some exceptions, and there's going to be areas where someone may not be able to do that. And the most common one would be where you may have a test and development department that uses either really old software or really new software that's still in beta and not a stable version. So you can exclude those networks by stating something like whole organization, excluding test and development networks. So with regards to scoping, if you do need to say no to the scoping question, anything you exclude has to be on a network basis. The CE and CE Plus is mainly based on networks and services on those networks, and that's how you would have to segregate.
So on that then, AJ, an organisation that say, right, I'm going to do everything, but actually I want to leave the sales team out of Cyber Essentials. I don't want their devices to be included.
Unfortunately, you can't exclude a department or a team or a product or a single device. It has to be a network. Okay. So if the sales team were on their own segregated network, which may be a good idea to keep them quiet, but it would have to be a separate network that's segregated from the rest of the organization. If they're working in the same office, then obviously that's not going to be possible.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. And in terms of the scope, then that's for an organisation that's getting certified to determine. That's not for us to tell them what their scope should be. That's their own choice.
Yes, it's down to them to decide as to what they want to exclude or include. But yeah, as I said, it has to be on the network basis. So if it's on any other basis, we'll then have to send it back to them, and they'll have to comply.
Okay, brilliant. And in terms then of, as I think this relates to devices, right? So end user devices and what is considered in scope and out of scope.
Yes, so typically anything that's accessing company data in terms of end user devices, then clients, servers, or cloud services would be in scope. There's a few exceptions, and they are the student devices. So if they have their own BYOD, if you have an MSP and they bring in their own laptop, that would be out of scope. Or if there's third-party contractors, or obviously customers, if a customer turns up on your site, we couldn't expect that their device is in scope. Ideally, these need to be on a separate, segregated network, and not on your the same network that your in-scope devices are on, to be compliant.
Oh, okay. So there doesn't have to be that segregation as well.
Yeah, so
Okay.
a student couldn't sit on the same network as a teacher. It would have to be on a separate network, but that device could be taken out of scope.
Well, that's quite interesting, actually. I didn't realise that could be done. Brilliant. And just on here, I had one example the other day. Third-party contractor. Does that include freelancers? Would you put them together?
Um, it is kind of down to how the organization treat that individual, whether they're kind of within PAYE or if they're actually, there's a contract and they're considered an actual third-party contractor. So it's one for, I guess, the accountants and HR to decide whether or not they're classed as a third-party contractor or not.
Okay, so as an assessor, then obviously you've done hundreds and hundreds of cyber essentials assessments. I'm sure you could probably reel off for quite a few of these. But what's the most common then issues we find with cyber essentials?
The most common, I would say, is where people have just misread the question, where it's asking for a particular, I think one of the most common ones. It doesn't help when the questions aren't as clear. So hopefully the changes in April will go a little bit towards that and make it a little bit easier to understand. But there's one question I think of, which is, it says in the title, how do you, I think it's something like device locking, and then underneath the actual question is, how do you unlock your device?
Right.
So it's like, are you asking how we lock or unlock? Because it's like, it gets confused.
Yeah.
There's quite a few questions where most people, including myself, the first time I ever looked at an application, respond in a very technical manner because you think that's what must be the requirement, and it's not. It's, if you keep your responses up to a high level, it prevents any misunderstanding, and it's easier to make things clear, and not to go into too much detail, which it seems like it would be a good thing to do, but not necessarily, because it means we have to throw more questions back at you just to get confirmation of what you're saying.
Am I right in thinking if it's like a yes or no question, do you do this? And you do, you can just put yes if you do.
Yeah, so you can just say yes or no. There's no requirement to provide any information unless the assessor thinks that you've contradicted something somewhere, then possibly you may have to amend it, or if you feel that there could be a misunderstanding somewhere from the assessor, you can make things clear, but you can just say yes or no. That's fine for yes or no questions.
Okay, I think you just touched on it there very briefly. The bottom one is really interesting because I think I quite often get feedback. I've had this returned, and the lack of consistency. So by that you mean if you've said you've got something very early on in the scoping piece, and then the answers further down don't reflect, it's got to run in line, right?
So common things with that would be things like in the cloud services question, where you have to list what cloud services you use. They may only list a couple, and then further down in the questions, they'll go into some response that says, we also use this, or we do this, or we use a malware protection system that we know is a cloud service, but they haven't listed it as a cloud service. So we then have to return it and go, well, you've stated that, so clearly you are using a cloud service.
Yeah, okay.
And that has to be included. Another common one is where people are using a VPN, but will say they have no ports open. For a VPN to work, their firewall has to have a port open. Sometimes people confuse it when they're not actually opening the port themselves and the device is doing it for them. So they assume they haven't opened a port. So it can just be a tick box on an all-in-one device which opens the port for them, and they misunderstand that.
Right. Okay. And how would somebody then combat that? Would it be a case of maybe running through the questionnaire once and then before they submit it, just almost going back through it and rechecking it?
Yep, you can go through it yourself and check and make sure you've answered correctly, or you can contact us and we can go through a review process with you and help you in any areas you may have issues with.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's useful. So in terms of preparing for certification or preparing for going through the assessment, there's a few different things on here that I think from your perspective can be useful. Do you want to just run through these?
Yeah, so the first one, gain a thorough understanding of the requirements. Basically just read all the documentation from NCSE, from IASME, use our blogs.
There is a requirement to actually read this document, right? You can't pass without reading it.
There is a question which says you have to state, yes, you have read it. So yeah, that is a requirement.
Yeah.
But you should really go further than just that one document and get a good idea of the requirements. Step on from that is to make sure you have good asset management in place. It's not a requirement for Cyber Essentials, but it's always good to have decent asset management, because if you don't know what you've got in place, how can you be sure it's up to date? In terms of a benefit for the business, you maybe have some laptops in a cupboard that have got licenses you've paid for but aren't being used. So it would help with things like that, where you're not wasting money on unnecessary licensing.
And AJ, with sort of implementing asset management, organizations don't necessarily need to go and buy a fancy tool, do they? They could use a spreadsheet. There's various different ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You could just have a sheet of paper where you've got a list of everything we have that you update monthly or weekly or whatever period you can manage. It's just a really useful way of knowing what you have, because it's quite common, especially for larger organizations, where they just don't know what devices are being connecting.
Absolutely. Excellent. And regular backups?
Yep, again, regular backups always good. If you are subject to an attack, it can get you back up and running fairly quickly. Again, not a requirement, but for day-to-day, the benefits from that are, if you're patching and something goes wrong with that patch, it's fairly easy to then restore the device and be up and running again to test again. If you don't have the backup, then obviously you're going to have to start from scratch.
Brilliant. Thanks, AJ. And then the last one there, I think we're going to dive into this in a bit more detail in the changes, but it's basically saying just update things, right, and update them quickly.
Pretty much, yeah. So the current requirement for Cyber Essentials and the Plus is that you must fix any vulnerabilities that have a CVSS score of 7 or higher. If a patch is available, it must be applied. If the patch isn't released yet, then that's okay. That we'll consider that as compliant, because obviously if you're waiting for a patch, we can't blame you for that. There can be some instances where a vendor doesn't give you that information. So typically Apple would be one of the ones that fit that criteria. In those instances, you have to install all of their patches, and it must be done within 14 days.
Right. Okay. So, AJ, we've actually had a question drop in here. I think looking at this, I think it sort of ties up quite nicely with this. So, this organisation in particular, they remediated vulnerabilities found on the scan when a new scan was run as part of the retest within 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, there were vulnerabilities that were deemed non-compliant. So, what's happened there?
That can be from various reasons. It's not kind of one thing. The most common one is, for us, what we'll do when we're doing a scan is we'll place a filter which takes out any of the patches that fit within the 14-day window, because the requirement is it must be done in 14-day window. So let's say you did an assessment today and a patch was released today. It wouldn't be fair for us to fail you because the patch has just come out today. So it can be that you may have not put on a patch which has been filtered out, and then you've gone over the 14-day window, and then that's why it's showing up in the scan, because you should have fixed it.
Right, okay, because you're outside that 14-day patch window.
Because the requirement is that you must be patching within 14 days. And if you do find patches outside of that, that means you're not fulfilling the requirement.
Yeah. And so as an assessor, we're not just going to retest what we found originally. It's no, if actually the times have changed now. Okay.
Because that's identifying an issue, because a major requirement for Cyber Essentials is that patching within 14 days. And if we're finding things afterwards, that's clearly an indicator that you're not fulfilling that. It can also be sometimes scanning tools can miss things on a first scan and then pick it up later. So that can happen. It can also be where you may have removed something thinking it's fine, and then you've logged back in and you see it on the device again. Typically that happens when you've got staged or provisioned applications. So you may delete something from an account, that account logs back on, and it's then reinstalled again. So the vulnerability comes back. Ideally, you want to be keeping an eye on your staged and provisioned software, making sure it's kept up to date.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, AJ. Okay, so some of the recent changes then to the scheme. So obviously, end of April, I think it's any registrations from the 28th of April will go onto the new Willow set, and then follow the plus requirements. So high level changes, AJ. So vulnerability changes.
Yep. So currently, the requirement is if it's patchable, you must patch it. If it's end of life, you must remove it or upgrade the application if it's available. From April, the requirement is going to change to include all vulnerabilities. So this will cover any sort of configuration change, any registry change, any scripts that need to be run. If the vulnerability is fixable via any of those methods, then it has to be implemented. So this is applicable to legacy protocols and services, weak default settings, misconfigured settings, which currently we would advise you that we've picked them up, but we wouldn't consider it a fail because it's compliant with the scheme.
Now this sounds quite significant. Now I'm not a techie person myself. This sounds quite significant. Is this going to be a lot of work for people doing remediations?
Potentially, if you're keeping up to date with patching and you're configuring your devices correctly, it shouldn't really affect you. But there will be clients who may have not seen this previously or unaware. Typically, most of these are simple fixes, but it can be quite time consuming depending on your deployment methods.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get an idea of scale here. So if we ran an assessment and picked up 100 vulnerabilities, how many of those might at the moment be filtered out because it's a config change required, as opposed to just a vulnerability that can be fixed by patching?
It varies from client to client, so I couldn't give you an actual average, but I guess possibly around 10% for the majority of clients, where 10% of their vulnerabilities may be down to misconfigurations or legacy protocols.
Oh, okay, that is quite significant, and that's definitely going to put some more work in the remediators' diary, right?
Yeah, it's important that they do fix those because they are vulnerabilities.
Right. Okay. And is there any specific ones you want to address that you think are going to be quite common that people should keep an eye out for? Or
it varies again from client to client, but we do often see where they've misconfigured things like the SMB1 configuration, or are using weak authentication methods, which currently obviously that's not included in the testing, but obviously from April onwards, that will be a requirement to fix.
Yeah, and to confirm that, obviously, when we talk about vulnerabilities that we find, obviously that's very much on the Cyber Essentials Plus. So
Yeah.
the question on the questionnaire will change to say all vulnerabilities now, and you have to tick that box. So
Yeah.
this doesn't matter whether it's Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus,
Yeah.
it applies to both.
So for Cyber Essentials, you should be going through following the patching requirements, following the vulnerability fixes from April, and making sure that that's all compliant.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, AJ. Okay, and then specifically around then Cyber Essentials Plus tests, there are going to be some changes, I understand.
Yes. So there's going to be some additional checks we'll need to run as part of the CE Plus process. The main ones are making sure the scope is as declared. So if you're stating you've got 10 laptops, we'll need to confirm that. We'll need to run some checks to confirm that that is what you have. I'm sure it's not that common, but I'm sure there are a few companies out there who may have 20 laptops but only declare 10. So we would be checking to see if that kind of scenario is in play or not.
And how would we do that? Would that be via a scan? Would it? Or?
Currently, IASME haven't given us
Mhm.
full guidelines as to what level we should take this to. It could be anywhere from just checking a console to see how many devices are connecting. It could be checking if you have an on-premise Active Directory, making sure what devices have an account, checking Intune, that kind of thing. It could also be a little bit further on from that and running scans, but IASME haven't officially provided that information to us yet, so we're not certain as to how far we take that.
Okay, and once we get that information, we'll be all over it.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. And then the whole organisation then check. So is that the equivalent of like a PCI segmentation test? Is that how we check that, or?
Yep. So if someone's declared a whole organization, then that's fairly easy.
Yeah.
It's if anyone's declared no to the question and they want to segregate, then we will need to check that segregation and make sure it's in place and compliant.
And how are there certain rules then of segregation? Does there have to be certain things in place to segregate?
So again, IASME haven't provided that information,
Yeah.
but from a security perspective, you should only allow the traffic that's required from an in-scope to an out-scope network. So if you've got segregation, ideally you want to block it completely, but
Mhm.
obviously there's valid reasons and business reasons for allowing communication.
Mhm.
That communication should be checked and filtered, and you only allow what's required.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, that's going to be interesting then and so just to confirm with dates and things like that, because I know I've spoken to quite a few clients about dates. So Cyber Essentials Plus, those requirements will follow whatever question set you certify to Cyber Essentials. I think there is a question on that, so we'll dive in. So thank you to everyone that already submitted questions when they registered. Really appreciate you taking the time. We're going to pull some up now and run through them and get AJ's point of view and opinion on it. And some may be opinions. I think that, perfect one here. Where do you see the future of Cyber Essentials? This is AJ's thoughts on it, and it's not confirmed or anything like that.
Okay. Just have a quick read of this one. So the future of Cyber Essentials, I can only go by what they've done previously and based what I think they'll probably continue to do unless they provide us with other information. And that's where IASME and the NCSE have decided to just introduce small changes over time, which makes it easier for everyone to keep up with the compliance level. And I think they'll continue to do that, just implement small changes so it won't be too difficult to be compliant. With regards to AI playing a part in CE+, it depends on exactly what you're asking on that one. So currently there's tools both from the blue teaming and the red teaming perspective that already use AI. So from a blue teaming protection side, things like CrowdStrike have a large component of that uses AI from a red teaming, things like Metasploit has a component to it. So that's probably going to continue in the future. More and more products will have that AI component to them.
And I think for now, though, we don't expect to see, a questionnaire saying how do you manage your AI security, or or anything like that at the moment, right? That's not around the corner.
Yeah, that's not something that's been discussed as far as I'm aware, other than don't use AI to fill in your application, because it will be obvious.
Brilliant. I think on the future of cyber essentials as well, hey, it all stems back to what the NCSE are finding and the threats, as it's always sort of run in line with what is actually happening in the world, which is why it's so effective. And AJ, the last one there. So how do you see legal and regulatory aspects of cybersecurity strengthening, especially around the new government, aligning with the EU? And I didn't see it myself personally, but the King's speech where he mentioned technology.
I think the King's speech mainly focused on bills and some AI components to it. As I said, IASME tend to do it step by step, so it shouldn't really affect it too much. Obviously, if there's a major introduction of some new policy, that may need to be discussed, but that's outside of an assessor's role. That's going to be down to NCSE and IASME.
Brilliant. Thanks, AJ. As I mentioned at the beginning, if anyone has got any additional questions, please pop them in the question box. And if we run through all the ones we've already had, then we'll address some more at the end. But AJ, so assuming that we requalify to the Cyber Essentials on the old version in March, want to upgrade to Plus afterwards, we have the 3-month window, or we need to bring it in. So I think I'll probably cover this one off, AJ. I mentioned a little bit briefly there. So if you register on the existing question set, will follow the plus requirements of that question set. So they align. You still get your 3-month window. So if you certify in March, you'll still have to go through the plus by June, and it will be on the old question set. Anyone that registers for Cyber Essentials after the 28th of April will be on the Willow question set and then be subject to those plus requirements within the 3-month window. So yeah, hopefully that answers that. AJ, have I covered that okay? Anything you want to
add? No, that's perfect. Right.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, AJ. Okay, so this question here, I think we'll have to unpick this one a little bit. It's a very specific question. It's quite an interesting one as well. So AJ, organisation has employees, they're using their own device to make phone calls on behalf of the business. They don't access the servers, but they do use a third-party software on their phone via the browser to get the data, I suppose, that they're phoning. They've been advised that those devices are in scope, and naturally with that have to list the devices, gather all the information on the operating systems, which is naturally time consuming, challenges around keeping everything up to date, and getting everyone to upgrade. Have you seen this a lot? How is this manageable for an organization?
So as they haven't stated whether they're making the phone calls on the phones or the laptops, I'll assume it could be either. Have they mentioned laptops?
Yeah, I think phone calls on their own devices. I think okay. If we said phones.
So technically, if you were just making phone calls, those phones could be out of scope as long as they're not accessing any company data or networks. They can be taken out of scope. But in this case, it looks like they are connecting to some service, which would then put them into scope. So they would have to be listed. In terms of it being difficult to list those devices, I kind of go back to my asset management response, where if you have that asset management in place, then that really shouldn't be too difficult.
In a real world example for this, AJ, say I joined URM, so okay, can I use my own phone during my induction week? And they said yes. Would it be at that stage then you say, okay, right, what make and model is your phone? Is it during induction? How do they actually get this information from people?
Yeah, so if company policy is to allow BYOD, personally, I don't think it's a great idea, but it happens and it's there. So we have to deal with it. So if you turned up, it would be okay. If you're going to use your phone for accessing company information, we'll need to make sure it's compliant and make sure it follows the same restrictions and compliance level for a company provided phone. It shouldn't be treated any different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just about gathering that information, early on, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like for this particular example, if they are accessing via, company data via that software, it definitely is in scope, and it needs to be managed.
Yeah, whether they're doing
way.
it via phones or via something like Teams and on a laptop, then those would be in scope if they're using BYOD, and they should be treated exactly the same as a company provided device.
Okay, thank you. I hope that helped to the person that posted that question. If it's something you want to discuss offline, dive into it in more detail, just please reach out. Excellent. Okay, so this is a client question. Fantastic. So somebody renewed Cyber Essentials through us last year. Has the standard remained the same? And are the same questions as in the same question? So I assume that will depend on when they're going to register their application. If they register before the 28th of April, it'll be on the existing question set, same questions.
Yeah.
If it's after April, it'll be on the new question set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah? So I think you've answered that.
Yeah. And in terms of preparation, I see the second question there as well. This may help that question. So the Willow question set is available to download. We can also ping it out to you. So if in your feedback or in the question box, if you want us to reach out and send you an Excel version of the question set, we're more than happy to do so. AJ, then if I can draw your attention to question 2 on the slide, what are the main areas that can be covered off themselves? I take that internally before engaging a third party, assume like us, to certify somebody to Cyber Essentials Plus.
Yeah, so for this one, it really depends on their knowledge level, the knowledge level at their company, as to what they can fix and can't fix without additional help. So it's kind of a difficult one to answer without knowing at what level they're working at. In theory, if you know how to patch, you know how to configure your devices, then you shouldn't need any assistance from anyone. Saying that, sometimes you may be fine with that side of things, but actually filling in the application may need some assistance, because it's getting that understanding of exactly what they require and what the responses should be. And that's something we can help with.
Yeah, excellent. There's a few dependencies there. It's very IT, isn't it? It depends. There's a lot of that. Brilliant. Okay, so this question here, thank you for the person that put this in. We took a few bits out. There's a few specifics in here that we just thought we'd take out for the presentation. But I think this is a really good example here. So an organisation, hybrid working, a lot of that going on at the, since COVID, a lot of that happening, using a lot of SaaS products, and giving users laptops, iPhones. So in terms of hybrid working and the security requirements, is having a software firewall, devices being on Intune, and asking people to do a few things enough to comply with C and C+?
From a security perspective, you want to go as far as possible, have software firewalls, have the Intune, as they've suggested, don't allow access to guest Wi-Fi systems. But from a compliance point of view, the only requirement is the software firewall. So if someone's working away from the office, the only requirement for Cyber Essentials is that that device is then protected by a software firewall.
Excellent. Thank you. And then iPhones, do they need to put some antivirus on for malware protection?
This is an interesting one, because what IASME have said is that there is currently no supported malware solution for iPhones or Android phones.
AJ, sorry, I'm an iPhone user. Is that because iPhones are just abundantly secure and I'd never have to worry about my iPhone?
No, it's just that IASME have said there is no supported version, so they're not guaranteeing that it will protect you from everything. So what the recommendation is that you have other policies or other mechanisms in place. So that can be an MDM solution, MAM solution, anything that will give you an idea of what those devices are running or prevent from running, etc. If you don't have those solutions in place, you can also do this via a policy. So you can have policies in place that say, if, for an example, for an iPhone, you can only download and install applications from the App Store, nothing else. If you don't follow that requirement, it's a reason to fire you, kind of thing. It's as simple as that.
Okay, brilliant. And Windows laptops, are there any changes coming in around firmware driver updates?
No changes. So previously the requirement was that firmware had to be kept up to date, and that was a specific question. But in the current question set, IASME have kind of removed that requirement. So there's no requirement to state firmware levels or to state whether it's up to date. Same with driver updates. Obviously, when you are patching, some updates will be done via firmware and via driver updates. So they will need to be done. Just because the question's no longer asking it doesn't mean it's not a requirement. And when we go to do the CE Plus for those devices, it's something that the vulnerability scan will pick up.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, AJ. And the last one there, so external help, time-saving options when renewing. Absolutely, there is help available, and I think that's something would probably be better. We'll reach out to you and discuss what options there are out there. But that can be sort of questionnaire review, whatever works for you. But we'll be in touch. Okay. I reckon there's probably quite a few organisations in a similar position to this top question here. So we have a mature ISO 27001 certification. What additional controls or policies are required for CE and CE+?
So this is quite a difficult one to respond to because it depends on how you've configured things. Because ISO is so wide ranging, it covers so many different areas from HR to technical. And it's covering lots of things that are outside the scope of Cyber Essentials. One area that can cause an issue is where ISO has a risk acceptance element to it. So you can accept risk by insurance, you can mitigate risk, whereas for Cyber Essentials, it's quite binary. It has to be patched. You can't decide whether or not you think it's a risk or not, or your organization has some other mitigations. It has to be patched. The only, what you could describe as a mitigation would be by segregation. So if you segregate devices and they have no internet connectivity, then you can still answer yes to the scoping question and do whole organization. Obviously, if you need internet connectivity for that segregated area, then you would have to say no and base it on that scenario.
I think this is one we come up against a lot, especially for like our larger clients that have ISO 27 and SOC 2. And it's like, right, Cyber Essentials we're really struggling with. I always use the device one as an example. Your ISO 27 might say, we've got 100 out of support laptops that are in use, but we're going to change 50 of them every year, and we've accepted that. Whereas with Cyber Essentials, it's like, no, you can't do that. You either meet it or you don't. But there's sort of not any specific then additional controls. They can all be sort of used interchangeably, I suppose, in terms of password policies as well and keeping things up to date. That may fall in with your information security management system anyway.
Again, it's back to the depends. It depends on what you have.
Yeah, brilliant. And AJ, is there now a requirement? So I assume that in terms of like a requirement coming in for technical controls on personal devices.
Yep. So that's always been there, but it's not in the same way people think. It doesn't require that to be an agent or software installed on your device to check or control it. Ideally, you do want to do that, but it's not a requirement. And the technical controls can be via an MDM type solution or MAM, where you're restricting applications, or any sort of control and policy which is preventing a device that isn't compliant from connecting to your information, your networks, etc.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
I would say one step further. I think it said something about clients, people refusing to connect,
Yeah.
refusing to install an agent. It is a risk when you use BYOD, because from a hacking point of view, that's an easier target than one that's controlled. So you're risking your business basically by allowing BYD. And if you have the good controls in place, you do mitigate that. But if you're just allowing them, then you do face the additional risk. And if they're not allowing you to access their devices, then possibly maybe you have a policy where you do just give them a device rather than get them to use their own.
Yeah, thank you. That's useful from a security perspective. Absolutely. Okay, this question is a brilliant question. Cloud services, I often have to defer back to the assessment team. Despite covering this off with many different clients, I always have to go back to you guys and check this. So how do you actually determine what is a cloud service and whether that needs to be documented?
Okay, so this is actually much more difficult to answer than it appears. So from a compliance point of view, the requirement from IASME is that, or what they deem to be a cloud service, is anything that's basically provided as a service. So infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, and many other as a services, which normally fit in one of those, but they decide to call it something else. So the simplest answer would be where if you access Amazon to buy some stationery, that would be considered a website, and you're just ordering something. That doesn't need to be considered as a cloud service. Whereas if you're accessing Amazon's AWS service, that would be a cloud service.
Is there, based on that example there, then it sounds like, could there be an element of risk, in terms of what you constitute as a cloud service? Obviously, if you're accessing AWS for your business, if that was infiltrated, that would be really bad. If an Amazon buying account to buy stationery, was infiltrated, less risky for the business, right? Is that the concept there, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And the requirement for the certification is that those cloud services that you list have MFA in place. So even for the ones that we wouldn't consider cloud services in that with the as a service type of thing, you should still implement MFA, because you always need that protection to anything that's accessible over the internet.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And just a sort of follow-up question there, is there any clear criteria for this? Is it just looking at the requirements document and sort of picking it apart?
Yeah, so as I've said, the IASME say it's the as a service provided cloud services that are in scope. So anything that's kind of like an application, I guess one of the easy ways to look at it is, if many years ago, I guess for the younger ones this might not make sense, you could run it on your laptop on premise, and now you're doing this over the cloud, that would be considered a SaaS. Anything that's just typically like a website, so you're accessing the post office website to send a delivery, we wouldn't class that as being in scope.
Okay, thank you. If anyone's got any specific asks about that, please do let us know, and get in touch if you're on the fence with anything. We're a phone call away or an email away. Okay, a few questions on this slide then. What would the oldest Android version be included, or I suppose what Android is considered compliant?
So currently it's Android 12 and later are considered compliant, which I'm guessing is probably still going to be okay for April. That's down to Google to decide when the end of life is on 12, but currently it's still supported.
Okay, and then Windows 10, is that due to be at end of life? Is it this year?
Partially.
Yeah.
I think there's been lots of misunderstanding of this, especially in the media, where they're just saying Windows 10 is end of life. Some builds and additions will be, but there'll be many that will still continue. Typically, what Microsoft do is they continue to support via what they call LTSC or LTSB, which is service channels and service branches for long-term support. There's various other versions that are still supported. The one that's likely to end is the one that's 22H2, which is what probably most people are using. Again, Microsoft do have a history of changing their mind and continuing to support things in a LT type SC channel. Whether they do that or not with this one, we're not going to know until closer to the time. But from what I'm seeing at the moment, it's unlikely. So if you are running 22H2, it's best to prepare to upgrade to a supported version.
Brilliant. And does the new version of Cyber Essentials deal with the challenge of personal devices accessing email through office.com?
That's actually there at the moment. So if you're accessing any information, so office.com, so I'm assuming accessing your email via a browser, you shouldn't be doing it by a device that's not trusted. So if you're using BYOD and obviously company-owned devices and you're aware of those, that's fine, but you shouldn't be running it on any other device. So for something like 365, there's configurations that you can set, so only trusted devices will be able to access it. Many organizations may not have that ability. So if they've got, again, a policy which prevents it, then that's considered okay.
Yep.
But it's not tested as part of the CE or CE process.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, AJ. And I think this is the last question of the sort of pre-scheduled questions that people put in. So it's about scope here. We've got quite a few questions on scope. If I want a limited scope for my Cyber Essentials Plus, but an organization-wide scope for Cyber Essentials, can they get the Cyber Essentials for the organization and then limit the Plus scope?
No. This is fairly simple to answer. It's a no.
It's a no?
If whatever you've declared on the CE has to match on the CE Plus.
That's it. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know there's quite a few organisations out there that often have, the larger organisations have different scopes, and different scoping statements within one organisation. So brilliant. Thank you, AJ. So I think we've got time for just a couple of questions that have come in throughout the presentation. So the first one is, how far is Cyber Essentials recognised outside of the UK?
It's actually surprising how many companies do want to get the certification who aren't based in the UK. And that's something they can do. It is open to non-UK companies.
Yeah. Okay. And do you reckon it will grow outside of the UK?
We tend to see more and more. Yeah. We did one recently for an Australian company. The time difference was a bit of a pain, but you can do it for any organization. We've done them for global organizations. I think one of my colleagues did one. They had offices in China, the US, Canada, the UK, all over Europe. Yeah.
Okay. And another question here. This could be it depends, but how do you handle eSIMs?
They shouldn't be treated any different because it's the device that we're checking and not the network communication method on that device. So if an eSIM is no different to a regular SIM, it's not physical, it's virtual and sits on the device, but it's still connecting to a network.
Yeah. Okay.
So if that device is connecting to company data or information, that's in scope.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. And I think we've probably got time for one more here. Okay, so I've had Cyber Essentials for a number of years. Why do I find that some certification bodies say some things are in scope and question responses, whereas others don't pose the same questions?
That's a difficult one to answer without knowing what the other certifying body has said. people can make mistakes. People can kind of get things wrong. We have a really good relationship with IASME. We're always putting questions forward and back. So we try and keep as up to date as we can with any changes, whereas some bodies may not. So that's possibly why.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes it can be a little bit subjective. Now, I know, as assessors, you're regularly, in the meetings and up to date. And realistically, every certification body should be singing off the same hymn sheet. In an ideal world, it's the same requirements, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. AJ, I think that's probably all we've got time for today in terms of questions. So if we didn't get round to yours, apologies. We will definitely get back in touch. And if anyone's got any additional questions, please fire them over so we can address them. Just to sort of wrap up the session there. So in terms of Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, we are a certification body ourselves, so can work with you to get the certificates. We do offer a couple of services to help the process as well. So we review the self-assessment questionnaires, and we also run more detailed sort of scoping and requirements workshop, which is essentially gap analysis, and we do a plus pre-assessment as well that might help you on your journey. Some upcoming URM events. So we've got quite a busy start to the year. So next week we're running a PCI DSS webinar as the version 4 changes are coming into effect, I think March time. So if PCI is up your street, please come along to that. Next month in February, we are running a session on internal auditing, specifically around ISO 27001. So we'll cover things like defining your scope, lining up to different standards, how to build in flexibility within your program as well. So if any of those are of interest, please register for those. And then just looking a little bit further ahead, in March, we're going to be going over SOC 2. It's something we're seeing more and more of in terms of inquiries and businesses looking into it as their third parties are asking for that. So that'll be all around SOC 2. And then in April, we're going to be covering off business continuity exercising. So again, something we're seeing a lot of and having a lot of questions from our clients. So I thought, right, let's put a webinar on so we can spread the word and talk to people on how to develop and deliver effective BC exercises. So if any of those are of interest, please register, subscribe to our mailing list so you'll get all the invitations and all the reminders as they go out. And if you wouldn't mind, follow us on social media as well. You will be asked to complete a feedback form. We're very grateful if you took 5 minutes to complete that for us, because we like to build our programs and refine them and improve them in the future based on your feedback. So if there's anything you'd like to see moving forward, please use the opportunity to complete the feedback form. And lastly, thank you very much for taking the time and spending it with us today. Have a great day, everyone.